If you saw last week's video, you'll know I went in search of a Tesla as a treat and missed, failing to get hold of one, instead getting a Polestar 2 to try out. This video is for those people who have asked for my thoughts on that car. I don't really do car reviews on this channel. It's not what I'm about. I have a mission, and talking about individual cars isn't really part of that. So today I'm doing a car review. Yeah, don't ask. As I mentioned in the intro, there's a bit of a story as to how I ended up with a Polestar 2 to play with. If you're interested in that story, it's in the previous video. I'll link to that from the end screen of this one in case you're interested. So to my thoughts on the Polestar 2. Well, from the very first moment I drove it, I absolutely hated it. At first, but there's more to it than that, of course. You know what it's like with a car you haven't driven before. It takes a while to find your way around it, to get things set the way you want them. EVs are very heavily software-defined cars, so there are a lot of settings to change. I had picked the car up from Heathrow Airport, a very busy area, and one that I don't know very well. And I was straight onto the M25 with it within a few minutes of having left Hertz. And the car was behaving really quite horribly, so those first few miles were not fun. The reason I've disliked automatics, full automatics, is because you don't get engine braking by default, at least not in low speed scenarios. I don't like the feeling that a car freewheels. It feels like it's running out of control. And the Polestar was doing exactly the same. I didn't feel in control of it at all in those first few miles. Fortunately, within a few minutes, the traffic on the motorway eased a bit, and I felt I could dare to go into the screen and see if I could change a few settings. The infotainment system is pretty intuitive, and after a couple of seconds I found what I wanted, which was regenerative braking. In the Polestar 2, regen is controlled by the one-pedal driving setting. It is easy to find and to change. It had been set to off, so I changed it to the top level, called standard, and I was immediately much happier. Now I had that immediate response to lifting off the accelerator that I enjoy. The feeling that the car is reacting to slow me down even as I transfer my foot to the brake pedal. Ah yes, much better. But not completely fixed. The second thing I was struggling with was that I couldn't find the speed limiter. In my Zoe, I used the speed limiter all of the time to keep check of my speed. In an EV, it would be easy to be driving faster than you imagined because of the limited audio feedback. So I needed to try to fix that. That one was a little harder to solve because the choices are not what I had expected. With the buttons on the steering wheel, I could cycle through various options. Off, standard cruise control, adaptive cruise control, and pilot assist. But I couldn't find the speed limiter. That's something I would not manage to solve until I'd stopped and had a good play around. It turns out that they've made a decision to separate the cruise and the limiter, and you can only use one or the other. So you have to enable the limiter through the menu, at which point you lose cruise control features. That seems like a strange choice to me. In the Zoe, there's a separate button for each, so very occasionally I will use cruise on a quiet motorway. Although in the Zoe, it's not adaptive. That's not an option available on that car. On the Polestar 2, they didn't allow separate buttons on the steering wheel. There's one button less than on the Zoe wheel. And they've decided that you can't have the limiter as one of the options you can scroll through. I think I can see their point. Mixing up cruise and the limiter might be a safety concern. Capping your speed and controlling your speed are two quite different things. But the result is somewhat unfortunate. You can change the menu to limiter mode and have the steering wheel buttons control the limiter, but lose access to all of the cruise control features. Or have one of the cruise modes enabled and not be able to use the limiter. Personally, I think that's a bit of a miss. You can change between them through the screen fairly easily, but I think it would be better to have both available from the steering wheel. That's what the Zoe offers. On that initial journey, I tried adaptive cruise control a bit, in that period where the limiter was nowhere to be found, and I found myself a little disappointed by it. It was great when following a car, as I had imagined it would be, but if the car in front changed lanes, the Polestar would surge forward somewhat aggressively, overreacting to the change in circumstances. There was not enough subtlety to its acceleration for my liking. It wasn't quite as good at adapting to new situations as I would like to see. What I would quite like added is a chill mode, a way to tell the adaptive cruise to be a bit more progressive in getting up to speed. If that option already exists, then I didn't find it. But because I wanted to use the limiter most of the time, I ended up with the cruise control options unavailable, as I didn't want to mess with the central screen on the move. And it seems a bit of a shame to lose access to all of those features. The final thing that threw me about the limiter and cruise control was that the functions of speed up and down are the opposite way round to the Zoe. Up means up and down means down in both. That's not what I'm talking about. Instead, on the Zoe, you press and hold the button to change speed by 5 miles an hour and just press to change by 1 mile per hour. But the Polestar 2 is exactly the opposite. A single press increases the speed by 5 miles per hour, which again can result in quite aggressive acceleration. A very similar problem as when on adaptive cruise control and something changes ahead. I'm sure you get used to these little control niggles though, of course. In time you would retrain the muscle memory and be comfortable with the new normal, but it threw me a bit, and more so in the first drive when using cruise control. With all of those little issues sorted, I came to really like the way the car handles. The car offers plenty of regenerative braking, whilst not giving you too much, so the car remains easy to drive smoothly. And what was lovely about the one-pedal driving mode that I had enabled was that it was proper, full one-pedal driving. The car will come to a complete stop just by lifting off the accelerator. That's something that seems surprisingly rare in EVs at the moment. The Zoe, for example, slows to about 6 miles per hour, at which speed it will creep indefinitely. You have to move your foot from accelerator to the brake to get it to stop, but not so in the Polestar, and that's a big tick for the latter in my opinion. Full one-pedal driving is something I really like, and it needs to become more widely available. The other thing that was really interesting about the Accelerator was the mapping. When I picked up the car, the rep made out that he was doing me a favour. He was giving me the long-range dual motor as if that was very special. He seemed to be alluding to the fact that it was a very quick car, yet it wasn't noticeable at all to begin with. Indeed, I started to doubt that it was the dual motor after a while, because it didn't seem quick at all to me. But as I got to know it better, I got to understand why. The speed is there when you want it, you just need to use more accelerator than in some other cars. The mapping is quite carefully balanced. With careful control of the pedal, you can drive the car quite calmly and sedately. But if you need the speed, then it's there, further down the accelerated travel. There is indeed plenty of speed to be had, but it doesn't get in the way of everyday driving. This car doesn't come across as a hooligan. It isn't compromised by the power on tap. It's very refined in normal use, but can get you rapidly out of trouble if you need it. In that regard, it feels quite understated. It's a bit of a sleeper. It will play if you want it to, but only when you ask. That's a really nice balance, in my opinion. An unusual but enjoyable characteristic. I thought the car steered very well. There are 3 settings for the weight of the steering in the driving menu, but I didn't play with them all, as I was pretty happy with the middle position. It wasn't giving lots of feedback, but again it was a good balance between the possible options, very drivable in everyday scenarios. The size of the car wasn't as daunting as I had expected at first. It's about half a metre longer than the Zoe and about 7 centimetres wider. You can't see the edges from the driver's seat though, so thank goodness for ultrasonic sensors. The 360-degree camera should help with managing the extra size of the car too, although I was surprised that there wasn't a reversing camera as well. The rather distorted view at the back of the car from the 360-degree view was not ideal on its own. And it's an important feature. The rear window is a letterbox through which you can see very little, and the door mirrors automatically drop to allow you to see the wheels as you park, leaving you feeling a little unsure what's behind you. However, I would imagine that you can turn off the automatic adjustment of the door mirrors when you select reverse, which might help you get better situational awareness when manoeuvring. The extra length of the car is put to good effect and results in a very long boot, leaving good space for cargo. However, the boot is very shallow. There's not much height between the boot floor and the parcel shelf, which might be troublesome in some circumstances. There might be items of furniture that are difficult to move in this particular car, for example. This might not be the thing to take children's belongings to university, perhaps. There is an underfloor cabin beneath the boot, one of quite a nice size. I think that would be an ideal place for me to put the small kit of tools I tend to carry with me to get them out of the way. And there's also a frunk, which is where the cables were stowed in this particular car. I didn't actually look in the frunk on the day, but I certainly like the idea. Having cables in the frunk makes them easily accessible even when the boot is full, as might be the case on a trip away from home, exactly the time you might need the cables for an overnight top-up at a hotel. The interior seemed like a nice place to be. I was a bit surprised that the motor whine was as noticeable as it was inside. It's not annoying, but it definitely gives the car a distinct character at certain speeds. I expected not to like the driving position because of the huge centre console. They have chosen a very distinctive cockpit style for the cabin layout, and that's not something I'm used to. The Smart is very open, a clever trick to make it feel that there is plenty of interior space, and so I expected the console to be very annoying. Indeed, I've heard a few people say that they found it to be in the way, impeding their leg when driving. But I didn't find that to be a problem. Having said that, it was unnaturally high, and so it did get in the way of my elbow a bit. The mapping and infotainment seemed very good. It was very fast and responsive, although there were a couple of usability issues I didn't get to the bottom of. Firstly, I didn't suss how to get back to the home screen after being in some of the other menus. Sometimes it was obvious, but when in the radio app, I didn't find an easy way to get back to the central 4-pane screen that included the navigation display. I suspect that was just operator error, and that I get the hang of it, but the lack of a home icon in the main navigation bar was perhaps an oversight. There is a reason why that method of operation was important, which is that the car always seemed to start up with the radio off, or probably muted. Each time I started the car afresh, there would be no media playing, and I'd need to go into the radio app to resolve that. In hindsight, what I probably should have been doing was pressing the volume control on the centre console to get it to resume, or to come off mute. But I've only thought of that since giving it back, so I never actually had the chance to try it. And so to the million-dollar question, for me at least, were the seats any good? And the answer is, meh. They weren't terrible, but the backrests did rather dig into my back as they seemed a slightly odd profile. The lumbar adjustment, proper four-way lumbar adjustment in this car, allowing the lumbar support to move up and down as well as in and out, certainly helped a bit. But even so, I couldn't quite coax them to be the shape I wanted. There seemed to be an area towards the bottom of the backrest that stuck out a bit more than I actually needed. So I doubt I'll be able to have the car long term. I don't think I, with my back niggles, would quite be able to make it work for me. But that is, of course, very personal to me and my particular issues. The other thing that struck me as slightly odd about the seats was the adjustment. There were lots of electrical adjustments on the driver's seat, but the angle of the seat back was adjusted manually. That's not a problem for me. Indeed, I don't really feel a need for electrical adjustment of things in the main. But for couples where both people drive the car, I can imagine that being able to switch between two different profiles as you change drivers would be lovely. But that's not going to work properly if not all of the adjustments are electrical. So the mix between manual and electrical on the same seat seemed an odd choice, because it won't allow for that easy driver change, at least not for every setting. So overall, did I like my experience in the Polestar 2? Yes, I definitely did. I thought it was a really good day. I thought it was a well-designed and considered car, and enjoyable to drive, once I had set it up the way I wanted. I found some peculiarities in the way that the software worked that I would need to find ways around, but I didn't have it quite long enough to be able to explore all of the settings to get it more to my liking. More time would probably lead to better results. The accelerator mapping is superb, and the proper, full one-pedal driving is a joy. But ultimately, I couldn't get the driving position comfortable enough for it to be an option that I could own one. However, I tend to find that about most cars, so don't let my problems in that regard put you off trying one for yourself. It's a very pleasurable drive, and if the format of this car suits your needs, I think you should definitely book yourself a test drive. Thanks very much for joining me. Your questions and comments on this subject are most welcome as ever. Have you tried a Polestar 2? Do you fancy doing so? If you've liked the video, then it's a help to me if you click the thumbs up button. And it would also help me achieve my stretch goal for the channel if you would subscribe as well. Thanks.